What gets me is, to go from a small amount of solar to a middle amount of solar is all of the infrastructure in between. You'll have to buy some degree of batteries. You'll have to buy the generator controller. You'll have to buy the switch gear, who's the connective bits from the wires going from point A to point B. You're going to have to figure out, am I supplying critical loads or main loads, and are my inverters capable of supporting both main loads and critical loads? And not all of them can. And so, I don't see much merit in doing a medium penetration scenario versus something where you're going all the way. Let's see what we got out here. Other things to consider are solar integrated products. Being the solar guy who goes out there and provides solar power and a battery to every remote wireless video camera or repeater station, so that they don't have to put in underground wiring. That you know may not even need you to put forward payback applications to sell something like that. Portability. Solar can be, if it's designed to be packed up and put back together again, that can be an area of expertise. And so again, we get back to how much does diesel cost. And here's a series of Alaskan villages where their diesel fuel costs range in the 40 to 60 cent per kilowatt hour, which is probably on the more extreme end. But it's not just usually diesel powered camps are in extreme areas. And so, here's a village in Alaska which doesn't get sunlight half the year. The other half it gets sunlight, but half the year no sunlight. Up at the very top of the world. And so let's assume the installation cost for this remote area is on the high end too. So you're hanging out in Alaska. You say, hey, I want to do a solar array. You get your solar array done at $3 a watt. What does that look like when you're saving 40 cents a kilowatt hour a year? Albeit with unusually low production. Without any subsidies or tax credits or anything like that, it's a 10-year payback on a 25-year product. So that's pretty good. And of course, you could potentially go down less on price, or actually be in a situation where the electricity costs a lot more. What I think is interesting about the diesel side is the off grid camps are selecting diesel not because cost. Natural gas is a less costly way of producing electricity than diesel, but diesel is very reliable, and so it's that reliability that they're paying for, as well as the relatively low upfront capital expenditure, and that locks them into a higher operating cost than they would with other technologies. But these off-grid camps, the most important thing is system reliability. So the you can look at the price of electricity of off-grid camp and say, okay, well, we can take care of that. Let's do the whole electric bill with solar. Well, are you giving them a more reliable system or not? I think the solar industry would like to say, well, yes, it's reliable because you no longer have to rely on those gas runs to site and it's self-generated. Well, yes, that's true, but you have to have the experience in delivering the reliable system. And generally, the better approach is to be cautious, to say the existing system's reliable, so you don't want to interfere with that. unless you really know what you're doing. And that gets you into a point where, you can either build a small project, collect data, you know, build up your reputation and confidence with the contractor, and that will actually be a more cost effective system than doing kind of a compromise where you're not, you still might have a budget that the client can afford, but it would be a longer term payback than either doing the whole camp or a small portion of the camp. What are some other advantages of solar power? So the energy security part is kind of what we've been talking about. The customers feel more secure if they're generating their own electricity on site. But that's not the end of the discussion. I mean, a lot of clients are surprised to learn that their solar arrays do not work if there's a power outage and the batteries don't have batteries. Or the solar array doesn't have batteries. They assume that the solar array will just be on during the day or something. And the one of the ways that solar has become inexpensive is they've removed all the unnecessary parts. And so, to have that off-grid battery backup feature, you got to put parts back into it, and that drives up the price. And sometimes the customers look at that price and say, you know what, just give me something that has a good payback that I don't have to worry about. So, energy security of solar, yes, that is an advantage. Rooftop solar, rooftop storage is more secure than not having it, but it is a little more difficult to deliver energy security to a customer than just saying, oh, the whole solar industry is doing this on every single job site is not true. Predictable electricity costs, that's a little bit better of a value. When you are buying less electricity from the grid, changes in electric grid policy are less likely to affect you. Although I don't really think that that's a strong selling point for solar, because right now the policies are unpredictable on a year-to-year basis, and so the lack of predictability in what your solar buyback rate from the utility company is going to be over the long term uh, kind of forces you to seek out applications where the payback periods are not long-term paybacks but short-term paybacks, so that your client is covered. um, so often solar is viewed as a predictable electricity cost, but that's not necessarily true. It's used by some to stabilize electricity costs. Community solar programs often come with 20 or 25-year contracts from the power company, and they often do not save the customer any money, but they lock the customer into a predefined rate for the next 20 to 25 years. So it's that predictable electricity cost that uh, customers making energy efficiency upgrades to their facilities, they like to hear that value, even if they'll turn around and give the project a thumbs up or thumbs down purely based on the balance sheet. They still like to hear these things that they're getting in addition to simple payback. The simplicity of design and installation. When I got into solar, it came from the oil and gas industry. The company I worked for was also building silicon refineries for solar in the mid 2000s. It was the very first solar dedicated silicon refineries. And one of the marketing guys for this company wrote in this report that said, yes, our photovoltaic, refinery business line is going very well and setting records, but we actually don't know if it's a good idea or not, because 15 years from now, the solar industry could be putting ourselves out of a job. The company's primary business was to design and build power plants. They said solar power is so simple to design and to install compared to traditional power plants that there are fewer man hours in the solar design and installation compared to typical power plants. The downside is you have to buy all of your fuel up front. You have to buy 25 years worth of electricity in advance. But as far as the project budget goes, the design and installation of it are a relatively small fraction of the project budget. That actually gives solar a competitive edge compared to other non-renewable power projects. You're buying more asset and less, soft cost or squishy cost. Um, that means that a designer can design a relatively expensive system in a short period of time. And that's where, the ability to tuck in high value design fees comes in. Environmental impact, some customers want to prepare for the worst. And perhaps right now, that is a little bit easier to understand than it has been in the past. There are solar inverter companies out there designing their components to withstand EMP blasts. So that if a solar flare or nuclear bomb takes out the electric grid and fries all the electronics, your solar array up on the roof isn't going to do you much good if the inverters all fry. And so this Solarc inverter can come with an EMP hardened shell. And here's them testing it. And there's the inverter down there. The social benefit of solar. That is, some of these advantages of solar can be overstated. I mean, everyone knows by now there's a social benefit to solar. It's good to be green. It's good to be environmentally conscious. On all sides of the political spectrum, you get solar owners who say, the payback, okay, in this area it's not the best, but I'm not just doing this for payback. Yes, I want the payback, but I'm not doing this just for payback. I also want to, produce more electricity than I consume in a clean manner so that I can leave something behind for, the kids, for future generations. There's a phenomena of one person on the block buying solar, and then almost virally it spreads. Another person gets it. Another person gets it. The social benefits, these kind of non-quantitative benefits, can get in the way of market reality and sometimes, therefore, be detriments. So if someone buys a $20,000 solar array, puts it on their roof, and they think it'll improve the resale value of their home, when in fact, while there is an element of truth to that, that element of truth might only be worth $10,000 and not $20,000. So, if they put a $20,000 solar array on their home and then a year later they have to sell it, they might not get all their money back. So, you have to be aware of what solar does in terms of adding real estate value. In a way, it can be frustrating because you might find yourself talking yourself out of sales rather than into them. But also, customers who are not prepared to adequately fund a job and are only chasing bottom dollar installs are not necessarily the best customers for you to do business with. So there is social benefit. It's not the same thing as monetary benefit. There are ways to have solar add more value to the property than what it consumes. A very small solar array can add more value to the resale value of the house than what it costs to install the very small solar array, even if the simple payback economics aren't even there. And that's because you put $5,000 of solar on a home, and a new homeowner comes up and says, I want to buy that house because it has a solar array on it, and that value is worth $5,000. Okay, you've split even if that array hasn't generated a dime of electricity, because the potential home buyer doesn't know how much money the solar array saves. They don't know, what the net metering policy is or what your production is. They just look at the roof and say, that's a green home with low electric bills. That's a home I want to buy, without necessarily doing the math all the way through. And so that's the real problem with the social benefit is they expect real estate appraisers to value the solar array as if they've done the math all the way through, when in reality, real estate appraisers don't do that kind of math. They say, okay, that solar array has made the home $5,000 more attractive, regardless of how much it costs to install. So I don't care if you spent $5,000 on it, $10,000 on it, $100,000 on it. It only raises the price by $5,000, and that gets into real estate financing issues on how much can solar be put into a mortgage or not. The industry's still working that out. For the most part, you can put solar into a mortgage. You can get a long-term home improvement loan for it. Sometimes those things can make or break the project, and in general, it's best for the homeowner to take out a loan for the project rather than go with a leasing company. Although that too can have its downsides. You can have unscrupulous solar sales companies kind of railroading customers into taking out high value loans, and then the liability of the sales company vanishes after the project when the savings don't realize, because the customer owns the product, not the third party lease provider. So there's downsides of solar loans as well as solar leases. Well, let's talk about some um, electricity basics. A volt times an amp is a watt. Um,